Good morning. Hello everyone. My name is Jessica Oldmeadow. I am the chair of the Kerferd Oration Committee. Thank you all very much for joining us here this morning. It's my pleasure to hand over to our MC for the day, Peter Sacco. Peter lives locally with his family and works at the Australian Centre for Rural Entrepreneurship and the Social Enterprise Academy team, which is based out of the old Beechworth Jail, a beautiful building I encourage you all to visit. Through Pete's work over the last 7 years, he's worked with many schools, young people and community leaders in the region, introducing them to social enterprise education and entrepreneurship learning and development. Please join me in welcoming Peter Sacco.
Thanks for that introduction, Jess. Hello everyone, good morning. It's my great pleasure and honour to be your MC for today and to help guide proceedings for this morning's oration. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and are gathered on here today. I extend my respect to their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging. I also extend my respect and welcome to any First Nations people present with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge some special guests who are with us in the audience today, who are past orators, Ms. Cathy McGowan, AO, and Professor John Thwaites, AM. Welcome this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge a special fellow by the name of Ray Kirkwood, a descendant of George Kerferd and a long-time supporter of the Oration, and this year joined the organising committee. So welcome, Ray. Along with a very, very special mention and welcome to the broader Kerferd family who are all here this weekend to take part in the oration. I understand there's about 30 of you, so I'm not going to go through everyone individually, but I genuinely hope that I get to meet some of you, if not all of you, over lunch today. So welcome. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge our sponsors, Indigo Shire Council and any members of council who may be here today with us, La Trobe University, WAW Bank and Quercus Beechworth. Your ongoing support for this event is greatly appreciated. And very importantly, I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us here today, both personally and also virtually, as today's event is being live streamed on what is our 20th George Briscoe Kerferd Oration. So welcome everybody. For a voluntary community organisation to lead such a powerful culture of community discussion on emerging issues for 20 consecutive years is truly an amazing achievement. And I just want to pause and everyone to reflect on that. I'd like to acknowledge the volunteer committee members and past orators for their brilliant work and energy that they bring to this community event. In particular, I'd like to give a very special thanks to Joan Sims, founder of the George Kerferd Oration 20 years ago, who is still part of the organising committee and who is joining us online today. Joan, your leadership, forward thinking and commitment to discussion in Beechworth has been instrumental in this event's ongoing success for the last 20 years. We thank you. So, the Kerferd Oration has always set out to challenge our collective thinking about issues in our community and to press us to consider what we can do to make a difference to the things we care about, here in Beechworth and the world beyond. And this is what gets me really excited. For me personally, thinking about what I care about, but also asking people around me, and in particular young people, what is it that they really care about? And what we can do as individuals and as a collective to make a difference. This is what gets me out of bed every day. Knowing that I'm making a difference to people and the planet is very important to me. I'm passionate about youth engagement and entrepreneurship education, and I get inspired by the creativity and innovation found within the ideas of people of all ages across community. Through my work, I have the privilege of collaborating with and meeting many inspirational people, and many of you are in this room. And these people are change makers. They're people who are often pushing the boundaries and challenging norms in an effort to make a positive change. They're people like our guest speaker today, Peter Hutton. Now, a little bit about Peter. Peter Hutton is known to be a bit of a maverick for his approach and leadership across Australian education. Peter proudly challenges the status quo of our traditional education system and is highly regarded and recognised internationally for his work supporting education leaders to build innovative and adaptive cultures in schools in order to create enabling learning environments for all young people. Peter began his working life as an accountant, believe it or not, and then followed his passion for education, moving into teaching economics, accounting, and business management. Over the last 25 years, he's built a leadership career in schools, culminating in his role as principal of Templestowe College, where he achieved a proof point for the world that demonstrated the power of student-led learning. In 2018, Peter co-founded Future Schools, which now supports over 100 schools globally. He isn't afraid to tell it how it is, challenging assumptions and conventions to explore how education can be done better. Now, we've all experienced education in some way, and we've all experienced a change in norms over the last couple of years as a result of COVID. And today, Peter is going to lead us in a conversation around the need for thinking differently about how education is delivered, why this is important, and the opportunities for positive change that this can bring. Please welcome Peter Hutton.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for your indulgence, because there's nothing that I like more than talking about education, and having 200 audience members here is just a delight. So if we can have the doors locked, other than this one, only because that's my escape route. Can I have an indication of anyone who's actively involved in schools at the moment? Right, okay, so I'll be exiting stage left. Please don't take any offence at anything that I have to say. Because I know that for, even as a self-selected group of people working in schools, the fact that you're in this space means that you're on the right side of the educational fence. Could there be a more important topic, particularly today, than education? How did we get there? Or how did we get here, and where are we going to? Now, I must confess I am dyslexic, which means that notes are purely an arbitrary thing that may guide my conversation, but we may have a wide-ranging conversation here today. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. And I think when you consider a 60 or potentially more than 60,000 years of unbroken history in what is a very, very difficult land to live on, for a culture to survive for that period of time with no formal written language, many symbols but no formal written language, it surely is an incredible testament to the efficiency of natural learning. Possibly the first true example of visual learning, or visible learning as the educators would know it. And I just wanted to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us today and pay respects to elders past and present. I was both honoured and humbled to be asked to deliver the oration today. I did only this morning decide that I should check what the word oration meant, and to my horror found that it was an elaborate discourse delivered in a formal and dignified manner. It then went on to say, as an example, there is nothing quite like his messianic oration. At which point I thought, for an education topic, these people have not done their homework by inviting me. I did want to extend my thanks to the Kerferd family. There are indeed a lot of you, and I think George set the path in motion with having 10 children. So thank you for joining us. I would also like to acknowledge the organising committee for making my beautiful wife Fiona and I so welcome in the Beechworth community. So thank you to you. Also to the organising committee and of course the past orators. When you look at the list of people who have had the opportunity to deliver this oration, frankly, I just see it as a pathway to my own Order of Australia. So if there are any people that would like to support that today, you'd be most welcome. In preparing for this, obviously one has to look up who is George Briscoe Kerferd. You think about the young man who started his working life as a boilermaker, travelled halfway across the world at the age of 22, became a businessman, studied law, was a gold miner. The part that I particularly liked was he was also a brewer and wine merchant. George and I would have got along well. He was a member of the Legislative Assembly at age 33. He was the mayor of Beechworth 3 times. At 43, he was the Attorney General, and also at 43, the Premier of Victoria, and a Supreme Court judge at the age of 55. And he achieved all of that in the space of 58 years, and yet somehow found the time to father 10 children. I think when we all look back on our lives, I do wonder what I've been spending my time on. I also wonder, though, if George wasn't around at a particular time when young people were seen in a different capacity to the way that we see them today. The education system has been designed to almost keep young people in a state of suspended animation for fear of what they might be able to contribute to the world. When we look at people of George's age, at 58, he achieved now what some people might hope to achieve in a working life of, say, 70 to 80 years. And I think that the education system is in some way responsible for that. And I'd like us to have a little look at how we ended up with what we call our traditional education system, which in reality has only been in existence for 210 years. Learning is actually a very natural process. Our minds and bodies have actually evolved over time to make us very natural learners. We have something called episodic memory, which means that we can remember stories. Story is our lifeblood of learning, and our mind has been built for it. We have muscle memory, which is a combination of both memory in the physical muscles and the body and also in the brain, and it makes it ideal for learning things about ritual and repetition. We've discovered things in our brain called mirror neurons, which mean that when we're in the presence of another person, we can start mirroring their behaviour. In fact, I've started some of you mirroring my behaviour by nodding just by doing this. Those things are designed to help us build community and live in relationship with one another. We are built to learn. Even when young children are in the womb, their body is already starting to prepare itself for the environment in which it's going to find itself. Even pre-birth, we are natural learners, always preparing to hopefully thrive and survive within the world. And yet we don't tend to let learning evolve naturally. We've doubled down on the repetition, the rigidity and the rigour, to where for many young people, schooling in particular is not seen as a pleasurable experience. It's seen as a place of ritual failure for some. I know in my own case as a dyslexic person who wasn't diagnosed until I was doing a master's subject on learning difficulties, and I turned to the guy next to me and I've gone, "Oh, come on, we're all a bit like that, aren't we?" And he said, "Well, not really." And I've gone, "Come on, letters reversing, changing, disappearing, moving." And apparently that's not everybody's lived experience. And at that point, scales fell from my eyes and I understood why I was blitzing kinder. I could face paint, I could finger paint, I could do clay, I could do kiss chasey, all of those things. I was the best. Had a bit of speed in those days. And then when they introduced this thing called reading, all of a sudden I could see kids, how you we're built to have a natural sort of sense of our place in the pecking order of life. And I thought I was, a pretty bright sort of person back then, I thought. And then I saw all these kids just surpassing me in every level, to the point where the only two kids using those sort of encrusted crayons, that we were left in the thing, there was myself and another person with quite severe learning difficulties, and we were the only two that didn't have our pen licence, and in the end they just gave it to us. Every day became an act of ritualised humiliation in a system that's built for a very, very narrow skill set. And unfortunately, even in the course of my time in education, that hasn't changed. Dyslexia is only one of many neurodiversities that are not coped with in a system that's built to assess things this wide. Let's start by looking what we mean by the term schooling and by the term education. Education is the formal or informal process of teaching and or learning. The formal or informal process of teaching and or learning. It's the big bucket, right? It's the big bucket. So therefore you can say, I learnt nothing from my formal education, even though teaching did occur. You can also say that my education was obtained on the streets. School is quite a subset of that, usually occurring in about the first 20 to 25 years of life. And it's where people deliberately come together with others in an attempt to learn something. That's the difference between schooling and education. And my contention to you today is that we've got schooling wrong and we need to focus on building a broader education. But we can't wait for somebody to provide it. That's the message. We have to take control of our own educational journey. We do have to improve schooling, mind you, but the time frame that it's going to take to improve schooling for many of you is going to be too long. If you've got kids that are in the system at the moment, you have to take control of education and support them too as well. So let's look at what the purpose of schooling was and how it came to be. So it actually started way back in Prussia, or it's called the Prussian education system, and the year was 1806, 25 years before George was born. Not that long ago, really, is it? So George was yet to be born, and Napoleon was having a great time beating the Prussian army. Even though the Prussians were better resourced, Napoleon was beating the Prussian army. And so the King of Prussia decided that he would send his advisors out to see why they were losing the war. And they came back to him and said, "Sir, our men are thinking for themselves. And this is not a good thing. Because in war, sometimes you're required to give orders and people need to follow them obediently. whether it's in their best interests or not. And so the King of Prussia worked with his advisors to develop an education system that taught three things: basic literacy and numeracy skills, because that was what was needed, to teach loyalty, and to teach blind obedience to authority. That was the start of our education system. It's why our schools are so rigidly constructed in hierarchies. It's why this was compulsory. This was the first time we'd had compulsory education. They've had schools, well before Roman and Greek times. But this was the first form of compulsory education for all people in a country. It's why they wanted to start so young, because at that stage the young are so impressionable and they're easier, frankly, to brainwash. It's why we divide education into small units and then have people move to create stress within the system and not allow them to sink deeper into learning. It's why we have so many petty and arbitrary rules in school, because it can actually force conflict so that teachers can end up breaking the spirit of the young person. We often think of an education as sometimes been described as a factory. Is that something that we've heard? If it were a factory, why do we group young people by their age? If it were a factory, we would be grouping them when they were of a very similar stage and progression. It doesn't make sense to teach students in a particular age when the research shows that in a non-streamed class, one that hasn't been streamed on the basis of ability, there's a 6-year academic range. It's a very bad factory when you're trying to teach people over that broad a capacity span. So for the next 100 years, and that 100 years also included George Kerferd's lifetime, education, compulsory education, spread throughout Europe. And George would have experienced this compulsory education in some form when he was in England. In around the 1900s, America heard about what was happening in Prussia, and what we call the titans of industry. The titans of industry decided that they would weigh in to the debate around education. Do these names sound in any way familiar? J.P. Morgan. We know that name? J.P. Morgan? Carnegie, Mellon, Guggenheim, Vanderbilt, Peabody, and Henry Ford. All of these titans of industry contributed in today's dollars many billions of dollars to build the American public school system. Rockefeller, J.D. Rockefeller, back in those days you didn't have to sort of do things behind the scenes. You could just publish things in the newspaper like this one. I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. That appeared in a newspaper and nobody was the least bit seemingly upset by that. So I've put a bit of a pall over the room. You're looking a little depressed at this time. Perhaps it's not that bad. Let's look at how Australia is performing. So we developed this thing, or we didn't, the OECD developed this thing called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. Just a quick time check there, we're all going well. Developed this thing called the Program for International Student Assessment, sort of like the Olympics for Year 9s, academic Olympics. And when they first did this, there was no way of comparing education systems across countries. Everyone thought they were doing a great job. Australia ended up being around number 3, or between 3 and 5 in the world. And our politicians said, because they're a bit sort of competitive, us Australians, anything that's got a ladder, we need to climb it. And so we've gone, we're going to double down on these tests, and so did the rest of the world. And so we all started to pursue this, measure what you value what you measure. Educators, I think we can all share this refrain, measure what you value what you measure. Yes, it does sound a little like a parrot. And by focusing on these measurements, we've risen to the mighty state of 25th in the world. So we were 3rd or 5th, now we're the 25th. The Grattan Institute, according to their measurement, suggests that in any one year, 40 kids make no academic growth at all. 40%. Not a great factory. In terms of kids' connectedness to school, in the last 10-year period, Australian Year 9 students' engagement in school has dropped more than any other country in the OECD other than France and the Slavic Republic. Our kids are more disengaged than almost anyone. We're the richest country in the world, measured by median wealth. Did anyone know that? I was quite surprised when I found that out. So, because of all our mining money, but the middle person, the middle family in Australia is richer than any other country in the world. Fact check me, students usually do. And yet, we're out of the 38 measured OECD countries, we're the 3rd worst when it comes to equity. In terms of socioeconomics, defining where young people end up in the system. Teacher retention. There's a cheery story. More than half the people that start studying teaching don't finish the degree. And those that start teaching, more than half are gone within the first 5 years. It's a fairly scary statistic. It's not that some people should leave, okay? Like, that's the reality. Some people should leave, and that's a good thing. They even helped a few on their way. But some of them have gone into education for the most pure of reasons, to help young people navigate the journey of a complex life. And what they've found is that in some settings, and it's certainly not all settings, but they've found themselves as guards and youth justice detention workers, because they're enforcing a whole lot of rules that have been imposed without them having any professional contribution to that debate, and that's what they're forced to implement. I don't think it's as bad as all that, in all honesty. When we look at our kids' performance on PISA, what I see is that Australian kids are a lot less compliant than kids in many other parts of the world. They just don't play the game, because I've heard them. They walk into the PISA tests and they go, "Does this count for anything?" Not really. Good. When I was principal of my school, or the school that I was at the time, Templestowe College, we once got our NAPLAN results back, and I'd found that the Year 9 age kids had lost 2 years of intelligence. I was a bit concerned. So I went and found the kids and I've gone, "Guys, you've become dumber." And they've gone, "What are you talking about, Peter?" And I said, "Well, I'll show you the results. You've lost 2 years of intelligence. I don't know what it is that you've been doing, but it's not good." And they've gone, "Is that NAPLAN stuff?" And I've gone, "Yes." And they've gone, "We know what happened." I said, "Tell me that." And they said, "We know you don't like NAPLAN, so we stuffed it up. We all ran dead." I've gone, "Well, the regional director's asking me lots of questions." So the next year I got the Year 9s before they went in, and I told them that story. And in the paper that year, we were the most improved school in NAPLAN in Victoria. Quite seriously. So let's start to put a bit more of a positive spin on where this is going. Some of these things are advice at a policy level that will be beyond your direct control other than your ability to vote. But we actually need education to stop becoming a political football, and we need it to be run in a bipartisan or tripartisan way, as we might soon have, by a group of educational experts. And those experts, some need to be academics from university to give us the good oil on what works and what doesn't, and some need to be people that are within the profession. They need to be answerable to Parliament, but they shouldn't be run by Parliament. And one of the biggest problems that we have in this country at the moment is most of the education departments don't have hardly any educators in them. They're actually run by people from all walks of life, none of which are education, which doesn't then surprise me when they can't come forward with a vision for the future, because education is a complex beast. You can't just, step out of the fire brigade and in, as happens, and out of police and out of public health as a bureaucrat and into education and then start to direct it. There's a huge learning curve, and it should be run by educators. We don't have the AMA being run by people from non-medical backgrounds, and it is a specialist area. So, how do we create an education worth having? Well, one thing is that technology may well save us. Technology may well save us, because in the past there was such a lot of knowledge, and essentially it had to remain in somebody's head or on a book. Now, because we have technology, we can have videos from somebody that's recorded something in another country, think things like Khan Academy, for instance, and we can record the very best teachers teaching this stuff, and we can access it at any time. So that's a bonus, and it will certainly be a bonus when we run into the teacher shortage which we're about to have. But better still, now that we have machine intelligence, we can actually do away with assessment. Because single point in time assessment, going in and doing an exam, is really inefficient and inaccurate. And rather than doing an assessment at the end of the time, when the time for learning and adjustment has come, so you've gone through a whole course with a misunderstanding, and it's determined at the end of the time that the whole time you've misunderstood the course, machine intelligence will assess whether a person knows something all the way through the course. And before it is then laid down in almost like a thick neural rope in somebody's head, the machine will go, hang on, you've got this wrong. And then direct you to a small, might be a little 5-minute video vignette that corrects your misunderstanding. So there's no need for assessment, because it knows your rate of progress all the way along the journey. For those who's a Spotify user, you all look young enough to be Spotify users. Didn't think too many. So Spotify is this program, right? And it selects music for you based on what you like, and depending on other people and what they like, it recommends music for you. Education's going to become like that. It's actually going to direct things, based on your choices, so that it presents information that's actually interesting to you. They've already got programs. There's a program called Photo Maths. And basically it's a thing that a kid can have on their phone, and you can take a picture of almost any maths problem in an exam, and it'll solve it for you. Sort of defeats the purpose of learning it, really, when you can just take a photo and the computer can solve it for you. So that will be one thing that happens. We're familiar with something called ATAR, Australian Tertiary Admissions Rank. What a system. What a system. It can compare a student that does music and history and fine art, and it can compare them to a student who's studying physics and chemistry and specialist maths. I don't know how it does it, but it comes up with a very finely graded score. It comes down to 0.05 of 1 decimal place. So you can end up with an 86.75. That sounds very specific. It must be accurate because it's a very small number. Do we understand this? So 86.75. If you get that score, you're smarter than 86.75%, and whatever that remaining fraction is, which I won't attempt to do in my head just at the minute, they have outperformed you. And it's a great system. We've had it for 13 years. It's so great, no other country in the world decided to pick it up. It's very efficient though, because if you get a higher number, you're smarter. The only problem is that number, 86.75, has 4 significant digits in it. 8, 6, 7, 5. The problem with it is that the second one is inaccurate more often than it's accurate. So if you got 86.75, there's actually more than a 50% chance that you actually got an 85 or an 87. And the authorities know about it. But because it's based on random calculation error, because it's adding a whole lot of small errors that have to be rounded up, everyone knows about it, but because it doesn't particularly advantage one known person over another, we ignore it. So we're using something to allocate places in university that is fundamentally flawed. Doesn't seem like a great system. It also pegs that person. How were you at school? I was a 63. Really? 63? Okay. I've said to students at TC, if you reckon you're going to get a 60, you're better off not having an ATAR. Because as soon as you get that 63, somewhere in your brain you will always feel, I'm pretty much middle of the road, upper middle of the road. I'd rather you didn't have a score and you found out what you were good at in life. But we all need an ATAR score because, of course, going to uni is the only legitimate pathway in life. Is that not true? But you have to have an ATAR to go to uni. Well, no, you don't, actually. Because only, of all people enrolling in undergraduate degrees in Australia, only 20% use their ATAR. 1 in 5. 4 in 5 don't get in with an ATAR. They go in through another pathway. So we don't need ATARs. The other thing is, since COVID, because university has now been delivered online, the unit cost, per student, the unit cost for delivery of first year university is almost zero. Because you run big courses, you're paying one lecturer online to deliver the course. We could actually allow any young person who's got basic literacy and numeracy to have a crack at the course. And if they make it, then they're in, and if they don't, then they find another pathway. But it's artificial scarcity to suggest that we can't allow every young person in the richest country in the world to start university if that's the best pathway. Personally, I think university is wasted on the young. All right? They need to go out and it's so much better when you go back as a mature age student, I tell you. But go and get a bit of life experience. Go and get a bit of life experience. Then if there's a stumbling block for university, then go and get it there. I do want to briefly tell you a little bit about some of the good things that are happening in schools, because the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So there are schools doing some remarkable things. I know Trish Broom and her crew at Beechworth are actually, fully across what's happening around the world and doing their best to implement some of these things already in their setting. We work with 100 of the most innovative schools across Australia and 10 of the most innovative schools in the world. I ran a school called Templestowe College. We called it TC for short. TC also stood for Take Control. Take control of your education. You can't, as a young person, wait to be given control. Otherwise, you'll be waiting a long, long time. TC was one of the most innovative schools, I'm going to call it, in the world. Now, if you make that claim, you better have some information to back it up. This school grew from 286 in the space of 8 years to 1,150. We had 1,150 young people, all with their own individualised learning plan. They wrote their own individualised learning plan, supported by their parents and signed off by a member of the principal class. We had no year levels in the school because it's ridiculous to divide kids up based on their year. We had no compulsory subjects in the school, not even English. Surprisingly, though, when we gave kids the choice, we had 800 students at the time, 797 chose to do English. But the thing that we could always say to them was, you volunteered for this. The young people got to see who was going to teach them. They got to see who was going to teach them in advance. And if they didn't like the person or didn't have confidence in that person, they could change. We had 80 businesses from, startup ideas to fully operational for-profit and non-for-profit businesses. We had a rule that we wouldn't pay an adult to do a job that a young person could do with a degree of support. So we had 115 kids on the payroll, doing any job that we could think of, everything from maintenance, tutoring other students, reception, running our IT facilities. We wouldn't pay an adult to do a job that we felt that a young person could do with a degree of support. But there aren't enough TCs around. There aren't enough Beechworth secondary colleges around. So my advice to you is if you have a young person or a young person that you care for, you might be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, mother or father, etc. You need to support that young person to take control of their own education, not necessarily their schooling. Kids think they're at school all the time. It's not actually true. If kids sleep 8 hours a day, they're actually only at school for 22% of their waking hours. Think about that. 22% of their waking hours are at school. That means 78% they're home with you. As I used to say, that's why it's the parents' fault. It's not mine. 78% with you, 22% with me. Don't bring your problems to me. So what we need to do is firstly explain to young people that they're not the ones failing school. It's school that are failing them, failing to take their own unique needs into account. We need to convince them of that because the whole of society tells them that it's the other way around, that there's this narrow band of success and only some may pass. And there's something called the hidden curriculum, which some people believe convinces you that that's your place in society, that it's a meritocracy, right? And here's your number, and I'm a 90 and you're a 60, so that's why I'm entitled to more things in life than you. It's a false meritocracy because money buys opportunity, money buys tutoring, all sorts of things. Australia is rich enough that we don't need anyone to fail. In fact, quite the reverse. We need every young person to be a success in this world. And so if you've got a young person who's not experiencing success at the moment, they may need your help to firstly drop the blinkers that school is the only pathway to success in life, and then you need to invest in your own education. And it doesn't have to be done individually. Team up with some other people that have got interests that you share, the same sort of passions and interests, and learn together. In school, that's called cheating. All right? In life, it's called collaboration, and it's a valued skill. Business is now starting to support these more progressive forms of education. Just like business taught blind conformity and obedience and basic skills, they're now wanting schools. They're coming to us. They're coming to us. We're working on a program with something called the Academy of Entrepreneurs. We've got $2 million of funding to run a entrepreneurship in schools program funded by the likes of Google, LinkedIn, Bunnings, 3M, etc., because they want the skills of entrepreneurship. They want kids to be creative. They want kids to have a little hustle and a bit of passion. And so now, rather than business wanting a whole lot of robots to fill the factories, they now need young people to have the power and the confidence, a little bit like George Briscoe, to go out there, Briscoe Kerferd, and make a life for themselves and for everyone else. They're the skills that we need. That's what we need out of our education. I'll leave you with this. Whether you're 9 or 90, I strongly encourage you to take control of your own education. And thanks for listening and coming along today. Thank you.
Stay here, please. Wow. Thank you, Peter. That was incredibly insightful and very entertaining. And for me, just that last point you made about how important it is that young people are teaming up and working with each other to get stuff done, and that's what we call cheating in school. Like, it's just incredible. Okay, I've got lots of things I want to talk to you about, but I'm not allowed to say anything anymore. My role now is to help facilitate some discussion and some question and answer time with the audience. So I'd now like to open the floor to anyone who would like to ask Peter a question. And we have some roving mics. So we have Chris over here with a mic and Ross over here with a microphone. And we also have the opportunity for people who are watching online through the live stream that they're able to ask questions as well. You can place your question in the chat box on the web browser that you're watching on, and our moderator, Virginia, over here will be watching those questions come in and asking them for the group. So open the floor. We have someone over here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I was just thinking to myself as you were talking, it feels like an impossible task to improve education. But if you had to choose one simple way to make the biggest change straight away, is it changing the syllabus, or what would you do to change education now?
Who am I? Sorry, just to clarify, am I the education minister, or am I me, or am I a parent, or am I a student? Because they're different answers. Minister. I think I can safely say this again now. When James Molina, he was very passionate about education, like he really was. He gave a damn, he just didn't know the right things to do. And I did have a slight falling out with James when I suggested we may need more than number plates to make us the education state. Sort of got a bit carried away in an interview with The Age, and we sort of didn't have much of a friendship after that. But what I suggested to him was that he stop wanting to do education to the professionals, and that he actually empower schools to meet the needs of their local community. And you can put some, like, you can put some safeguards in with that, that if like at TC, our parent satisfaction was 95%. So on a 5-point scale, parents are either happy or very happy, all right? And our kids were the 90th percentile for school connectedness. How can you not like it when you can do pretty much what you like, as long as it doesn't take too much time, doesn't take too much money, and doesn't negatively impact on somebody else? So what I would do if I was minister would be to put schools back in charge of meeting the needs of their community. They would have to put forward a plan that had to be vetted by somebody who knows something about education to go, yep, that's legitimate, that's referenced, to the current research, and then give those people an opportunity to deliver on that plan. And if either parent satisfaction dropped through the floor or they consistently fell short of that plan, then I'd remove the leadership team and put a new lot in. And that would turn things around very quickly.
Yeah, thanks for your very insightful and refreshing talk, Peter. A couple of comments / questions. Australian culture as we know it was always built on the tall poppy syndrome. Through various flavours or colours of government, we've had focus on education, or focus on elitism, or focus on wealth, or all these different ways that we put class structure into our society, including, as you mentioned, the ATAR scores, which puts a glass ceiling in a head to say to a kid, I'll only ever be pardon 60. My pun, a shit kicker. Anyway, we put enormous amount of focus on sporting achievement, and we call ourselves a sporting nation, yet when you look at the most of us, we're more watchers than doers. We also have this massive urban-rural divide, which is another class structure. And having lived in a city for 50 years of my life, I've discovered that is very wide and getting wider. I guess what I'm asking is, how do we break down this tall poppy syndrome, this culture of negativity, this Australian culture that we've developed, which is a bunch of knockers, a bunch of whingers, and how do we make our kids to actually be really aspiring to be the best they can be in their academic and their educational and their schooling pursuits versus our absolute obsession with sporting excellence, which seems to colour everything else. And I'll leave it there.
It's a really interesting question, because when you said our culture's built on a style of, I thought you were going to say, like, you know, people who are ingenious and problem solvers and things like that, because like we Australians are so disproportionately represented in terms of inventiveness and, you know, problem solving, because we had to. You know, like we were living remotely, most people were living remotely, and they had to solve their own problems. So I thought you were going there. I do agree that there is something of the tall poppy. But the thing that there's so many points that, you know, that you make there that are worthy of attention. Like the rural city divide, that can actually be reduced, not increased, you know, in the short term, because so many things are now online. You know, the one of the good things that came from the pandemic is that most people can now, you know, use video conferencing and things like that, which means that a number of people can actually start viable businesses and be located in Beechworth or, you know, Central Australia, as long as they've got good internet connection. So that could actually see people moving away from or certainly spreading out from the city. But to go to the core point is, why do we pursue sport rather than, you know, academic excellence or excellence in other fields? I think we've built up an education system that says that only these people can be successful. So if you're a kid that's not in that tight band, I'd do sport as well. Doesn't make sense. Don't go into a competition you know you're going to lose all the time. So that's why, as kids with aspiration, kids with desire, go into sporting fields. Like, if you look at dyslexics in sport, like, they're massively overrepresented, because if they can't get any status in school, they'll go into sport and kill it in that thing. But often those kids come out of sport and then go into their own businesses or, you know, into other professions and really rise up quite quickly. So I guess what I would say is, if we had an education system that had broader definitions of what success is, and it can be in the arts, it can be in music, it can be, you know, the full spectrum, then I think we get a more balanced approach where we don't have kids not succeeding in sport. But, you know, even the definition of sport changes to urban exploring, to parkour and, you know, rock climbing and all of these things that can then morph into actual businesses and things that kids can make a living out of as well. So I'm not sure I've really answered that question, because it was a great one and multifaceted.
With the coronavirus, we've had many hours and hours of children learning at home on their computers. One of the big downsides of that is the lack of socialisation of those children and working in the school system. How do you see the future developing when computers are such a component of education, and that working at home has now become such a thing in society? Will schools be doing that type of work as well? And what is going to be the ramifications for children?
It's a good question. Technology is an interesting thing. You know, a lot of people go, "Oh, technology, well, it's dangerous. It's a can of worms. We don't know what we're going to get." My theory with technology is, whatever your natural style is, you can accelerate it with technology. So if you're a school that's command and control, you can introduce technology for more testing, more online, more assessment. Or if you're a school that's more collaborative and things like that, then you can use the technology to collaborate with people across the world and so on. You can have kids on their own individualised learning journeys, and you can use the technology to advance that. So technology in its end doesn't say what's going to happen. It just means that you can do more of whatever your natural preference is. So for some kids, learning, well, when you said they were learning at home, I sort of felt like correcting you there, Ray, and say, no, they were at home and there was some technology in the room. There might not have learning taking place. The other thing that COVID really showed up was the equity question. Because, some kids, and like this is horrifying, but some kids in elite schools, I know that the teachers of, these are VCE Year 12 teachers, they finished virtual teaching for the day and then they were teaching all night, one-on-one, tutoring kids and helping those that had the capacity to pay get the best results. So these kids are getting one-on-one tutoring from Year 12 teachers. They can't not from their own school, but from other schools. So they had just like a full list, some of them. Other kids had one computer that mum or dad might have been using for their work to zoom in and out of, and they're sharing that across 4 kids in the family where there was only one central living space with dodgy internet and limited bandwidth. So it really did, and schools did, honestly, that was one thing that schools really did quite well, was to put machines into the hands of kids, but it took a long time and we didn't get it right. The other thing about COVID is some kids really thrived. We can't forget about that. Some kids absolutely thrived. And I think where we'll end up landing, and we actually need some legislative change, because if you actually have a blended form of delivery at the moment, the government will cut your funding. If they're not on site each one of those 5 days, they're not considered a student, even though they're logging in remotely. So schools have to either be distance ed providers or full school providers. And it's a pretty easy tweak of the legislation to make that happen. But what we're going to be better off is having a system where young people can semi-choose, and I mean semi-choose, how much they engage face-to-face. Because for some introverted kids, if we allowed them to purely choose, they would just never come out again. We would just never see them. And so there has to be a balance, but some of that will certainly be better for their mental health. But we still need adults in the place. Okay, we can't just hand it over to the Spotify of curriculum and say, see you in 12 years. I think technology will actually free people working in schools, and I deliberately say people working in schools rather than teachers, because to me support staff are very much an integral part of the educational process, but people working in schools will actually be there for their ability to relate, for their humanness, because that's their actual value, not whether they can teach Python.
You just mentioned the introverted kid that stayed at home and in some ways thrived during COVID. And definitely, as there are many teachers in the room who would have seen that happen. I'm really interested though, going forwards, if we're going to address the needs of kids honestly, that social and emotional learning is obviously something our curriculum doesn't address effectively at this point. And I'm wondering around the world what models you've seen that you think we could implement.
Yeah, for goodness sake, don't put it into the curriculum. All right? If there's any way to turn a kid off, just by putting it into the curriculum, you'll achieve just that. To be honest, I don't even think it's a job for adults to solve. I think it's our responsibility to turn that problem over to the young people. And, like Lexi, sitting there, who engaged in one of the online debates around these topics, my central belief, and this is like core deep, okay, is that young people have far, far more capacity than we give them credit for. They can solve these problems. They don't need adults to really just get in the way and then try and document it and measure it. We just need to measure everything. If we don't know what to do once we've got the measurement, by the way. All we just know is how big it is. All right? But if we actually turn this real life problem over to young people and consulted with them and say, how do we best support you? We've actually, at Future Schools, we've actually developed a model called learning hubs, where instead of these huge schools, they're also very, very a recent development. Most schools were quite small. 600 was a big school. Now we've got these things that are sort of 2,000 plus. How do you feel known? either as an educator or as a young person in that model. So we've actually developing a model called Learning Hubs, where there's a community of students over a 3-year age range. Sounds very familiar, like Montessori, doesn't it? Yeah, where did I get that idea from? But 3-year age ranges where they're a self-organising, self-supporting learning community that's adult supported. So a 3-year age range that has a range of family groups of 8, a community group of 26, and then a hub of 80 young people, supported by a consistent group of approximately 10 staff. Not all paid, by the way. By doing that, and we know from a thing called Dunbar's number that basically, a good community size is anything less than 120. I think 100 is a really great number. And even if you've got a school of 1,200, quite simple, just have 12 learning hubs, and each one of them is almost like an autonomous unit, so that every young person is known, and you literally turn the leadership of that group, like that's not an adult-led, they're not adult-led, the families or the communities, they're student-led. With support, we need to train them up, you need to scaffold them, because at the moment the current system has taught them to live in infancy. If you think about it, if you look at most adolescents, Lexi excluded, most of them live in a state of perpetual infancy. Their parents support them in every way, shape and form. You look at George Briscoe, right? He just left home. Just went and did it. And they survived. They didn't have, the bank of mum and dad backing them up. We need to trust in young people to be able to solve their own problems.
Okay, thanks. This is a question from Lisa, who says, take a look at how the education learning is done in special schools. For those that live with a disability, meeting the needs of each child's special interest or need, ironically, this is where they strive and achieve, rather than in the schools that teach a one-size-fits-all curriculum. Having 2 children who live with autism, they learn differently, and their schools thankfully offer different ways of learning and implementing their interests, and they're striving. Mainstream schools do not work.
Agreed. We don't need more money. That's the other thing. We just need to spend it on different things. We don't need more money. There's actually quite a lot of money in education. We just don't spend it on the right things.
What's your opinion or experience with the IB? Are there things from that particular curriculum that you could use in lower forms?
Yeah, so IB is International Baccalaureate. There are only 4 different curriculums that you can study in Australia. One is the Australian curriculum, one is the International Baccalaureate, one is Montessori, and one is Steiner. They're the 4 recognised curriculums. I don't really know that much about the Steiner curriculum. I've worked with lots of Steiner kids who have had pretty good outcomes. I've worked a lot with Montessori, and I find that to be excellent, to be honest. IB, it does have programs all the way from the PYP, which is primary years program, middle years program, and then the International Baccalaureate. If I had to have a curriculum, it may well be IB. But it really, if you're talking that particular qualification, it's really suited to very academic kids. It's more suited to them. So you can't just run the straight IB, because it only would meet 20% of kids' needs, really. But it's a good program. The IB does actually have a practical thing, but almost nobody teaches it in Australia. It's being taught in the US, and it's excellent, but we don't have it for some reason.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I really resonate with everything that you've said. I'm sure I'm not alone in the room on that. I'm a teacher with nearly 25 years experience, and I've taught IB, Montessori and 2 limited, and the Australian curriculum. I'm music and performing arts background, and I'm tired, but I love...
Let's give her a clap. Give her some energy. Feel it in the room. I feel like an evangelist. No, sorry.
And I'm sure I'm not alone. I feel like... What do you say to teachers like myself who can feel themselves coming to the end of that part of their career, but want to sidestep into something just like what you're talking about, being able to be a part of that in spreading that, moving into that political kind of realm where we can actually make change, so that teachers can be the change and help the kids be the change. Because I agree, we've dumbed so many things down for kids. They're more than capable. And then in other ways, we expect them to just comply, which is against their natures, and just do as they're told. So it's like this kind of conflicting, sit down, be quiet, do as, and have your behavioural things. Whereas like what I think you're talking about really goes to the core of us as a species, the human species, and trying to work with our younger generations. I look at advice for teachers like myself.
Yeah, really good question, and thanks for your that level of honesty too. Yeah, because your employer's likely to end you up now. No, not really. Oh, she's tired, that one. Firstly, I would disagree that the nature of kids is to not conform. Was that the?
It's not so much that not conform to what we're expecting.
Oh yeah, because it's ridiculous. I applaud them in not conforming to the ridiculous stuff that we make them, that we just try and trip them up. We actually try and fight with them over whether their shirt's in or out. I've got schools that I know of that are wearing blazer and tie and they're in the middle of a paddock. If you walk down Collins Street in Melbourne through the business district, nobody's wearing a tie, but you go out to some of these places in remote areas of Australia and here's a kid with a tie who's getting a detention, as a 17 or 18-year-old, in previous times they would have out on a battlefield. We'd trust them to defend the country, but, they're getting detention, Harry, for not having your button done up. Just crazy. When we, at TC, when we removed compulsory subjects and allowed students to choose, things that were appropriate for them, the majority of kids really tested themselves. They didn't all choose, I'll have 6 lots of PE, thanks. They actually chose things that were challenging for them. But more interestingly, our discipline statistics fell by 80%. Just 80%. And I've gone, what's going on here? To be honest, I thought the staff had stopped filling in the data. Do you know what I mean? I was going, we're not filling in the data. And so I gave the staff a bit of a rouse, we've got to record this, we've got to have value what you measure what you value. And they said, no, there's just less of it happening. And I've gone, why is this? So whenever we didn't know what was happening, we'd just get the first random group of 8 young people and say, can you come in here? We would bribe them with chocolate, by the way. And they knew it. And so we would come in and we'd say, guys, this is the statistics. We had, we used to have this many detentions and things, and now we've got this many. What's happening? And they're going, well, when you're allowed to study what you want with people that you like and you're learning from who you like, why would you muck around? And that's kids' true nature. They're not evil who need to be controlled. We just need to stop trying to trip them up with ridiculous rules. But to your point, and that is what do I say to educators who are still in the game? Okay, it's very easy to be frustrated by what the minister should do or what your principal should do or what your head of department should do, etc. All you are responsible for is you, right? Don't worry about anyone else. There's other people fighting that game, myself included. But all you need to do is exert yourself within what I call your realm of influence. So that might be in a classroom. Just treat your kids with humanity and they will feed you that back. They will give that back. Okay? Treat them with humility. Don't enforce that they've got their top button done up or whatever, or cut the kids some slack with homework. What is it with homework? Again, there's no research to say that homework works before year 10. None. Think of all those wasted arguments that you've had. Kids are far better off having an extra hour's sleep. Sorry, side issue. But all you can do is manage your class and sort of play in, we call it learning to dance comfortably in the grey space, right? Whenever you encounter a rule, there's inevitably black And there's white, and then there's like this grey space in between. What we say is get comfortable being in that grey space. You can't be black because you can and should be fired, all right? But be very comfortable as long as you've got a plausible reason for what you're doing. Just play in that with joy. And sort of you feel like a little bit of a renegade on the inside, and then join with other renegades, you know, but don't worry about changing the big system. There are people playing that, and it will change because business need it too, frankly, because they need people who can think.
Okay, we've just got another question from our virtual audience.
Okay, thanks. Question from Diane, who says, as a failed teacher but a successful parent, I'm concerned at expecting parents and children to take up the slack when they're not yet empowered to do so. Asking schools to push into innovation when teachers are already pushed beyond their capabilities. What practically can we do to change the Australian education system for everyone?
So the first thing that as future schools, we're working with 100 schools, the first thing we say is don't give people more to do without taking something away. Okay, you can't, seriously, these people are at breaking point. You can't just give them something else to do. We always start by working through with students and with staff and going, what are we doing that we could just take away? Just take it away. Even if you choose to put it back at a later time, what can we strip away out of the system so that you can then, start innovating? Because think about this, right? Imagine you're a teacher we've all got an idea of what a teacher's job is, marking stuff, teaching stuff, telling kids off, doing all of this sort of stuff, working with people who are unpleasant sometimes, certainly in the secondary setting, okay? No, it's true. Primary teachers, you're lovely. Secondary, you're tough, okay? You have to be. It's true. We know it's true.
You better look out at lunchtime.
It's true. It's a badge of honour. We deal with adolescents. We can do that. Where was I going with that? What were we talking about? What was the question?
So the question was also,
So imagine instead of that mental model, so this is in a government school, right? A government school. So we've got more regulation than independent schools, all right? Okay, here's your teacher lot. You're only teaching volunteers. Every kid that's in front of you knows you're the teacher. So if they don't like you, they will choose to go somewhere else because they can. And they've volunteered to be in your subject. So instead of a 6-year academic range, you've probably got a 2-year range because no person chooses something that is miles too hard for them or miles too easy. It doesn't make any sense. So you're teaching to a narrower band for kids that want to learn your subject who know you're teaching them. Doesn't that sound like an easier job? It's massively easier. All right, we've got all these artificial constraints teaching kids that don't like you and don't want to be in there and they can't do the work anyway. It's destined for disaster.
Okay, just going to move it along a little bit because this is amazing.
Pete's telling me my answers are too long. Subtly.
Try to get to it.
Yeah.
I
got it.
Hear from as many people in the audience as possible. So just a question here, another question here, another question in the middle. But if people were happy to go a little bit longer, let's keep the conversation going. So.
Thanks, Peter. That was fabulous oration. I want to talk about institutionalisation. I'm the chair of the local Montessori primary school. And when I started on that gig, I was of a mindset that all schools had to follow a bouncing ball. And for me, it's been quite a revelation to know what opportunity presents itself as an independent school. And I guess being secular, we call ourselves a big I independent school. But I'm keen to understand your thoughts around, we've got such a large independent sector, why is so few trying to do anything different?
I don't really know, is the honest answer. There does seem to be a question around what parents want. There's a lot of people leading independent schools that think that the parents want rigour and marks and all of this. And to a degree that's true, but not all parents want that, because some of the parents actually know that their kid's not going to succeed at that. And so what we're encouraging many of our independent schools to do is have an alternate stream, okay? Just like I don't want traditional education done to kids, nor do I want innovative education done to kids. If the traditional system is working, that narrow academic band is working for kids and they're liking it, bless them, let them go, okay? But if it's not working for them, then come up with an alternate stream. But to be honest, there's lots of nervous tension between the leadership in independent schools and the board, and then what the parents actually want. But the mental mindset that we have around what schooling is very strong.
I guess my follow-up to that is institutionalisation actually, that's not just this group, but actually is a systemic community issue.
Totally.
And so changing that is, one of those feels like an enormous thing, and how do we as a population challenge that?
I have done almost nothing else for the last certainly 5 years, but 15 years. I have no other interests. This is it. This is all there is, just education. And I've kicked at it, I've pushed at it, I've abused it, I've been nice to it, I've tried everything, and it's a bit slow to change. My go-to at the moment is to build a series of schools that people can see it. They need to see it, they need to walk through it, they need to talk to kids that's operating on another mindset, and then I think you've got the chance of replication.
Thanks, Chris, over here. And after this, we're going to go to the middle, and then I think we're going to have to continue on with the proceedings.
And I'm happy to stay and talk. I'll be here all night.
I just wanted to say, as someone who has just finished going through school, last year is when I finished. I didn't finish my year 12. I'm from Sydney, we do HSC there. It was a very difficult time for me. I did not enjoy it, I did not do well. But I did actually end up going to TAFE. And so I guess my question for you is two questions. What do you think of TAFE as an education system? Just because it is not as defined by age. The age range in my class was 16 to 55, and we were all learning together the same things. And also, what could I do to voice what I would like to see in the change in education system? What are avenues I could take to kind of share my voice and my experiences of how the education system failed me. Especially because I had teachers say directly to me, if you leave, you're not going to be anything, you're not going to be successful. I was told that another girl in my class could be a lawyer and I could be, you would just be, an artist or something less. And it really affected me for a lot of my life, being told that as a young person, and having all of my stress beyond you have to get a certain mark and all of that.
Wow. I always love when a young person says, and some people are like 55. 55. That old. I could slap your teachers. Any teacher that says to a kid that, what was the term, that they're not going to become anything or that you can just become an artist. I love art. Yeah. I know. I know that. Yeah. Okay. Where to start? Yeah. As opposed to saying what I was wanting to say. My wife is sometimes my translator and my conscience. She could sense that I was going to go too far with that answer. Thank you, wife. That was an intervention. You just saw an intervention happen right there. you're going to be fine for a start, okay? More than fine, because you've actually worked out that the system is wrong. Like, far more young people actually never reach that conclusion that you've reached, that it might just be the system that's failed you, not you that's failed the system. Some people will go through the whole of a university degree and come out the other side and then be unemployable with no life skill, and then they realise that, plus they've got a $35,000 HECS debt. Okay? TAFE. I do worry that some of the teaching at TAFE is a little boring, but as a system, I really support TAFE. Okay? As a system, I really, really support TAFE. The other thing is, like, 3 years, like, that's another thing that holds back particularly people that don't come from money, right, who come from unstable home lives and backgrounds. Committing for 3 years, man, that's like 6 lifetimes. They don't know if they might have a house in the same district in 6 months. So we should actually change the education system so everybody does a certificate course, and when they pass the certificate, then they can do a diploma. They pass the diploma, another year they've got an associate diploma, pass another year, they've got a degree. It's far more economical to run that way, and people can then choose to leave after 1 year, and they might have, like, I've got a diploma of law and I've got a diploma of teaching, and then I perhaps did my bachelor in engineering or whatever.
My courses were 6 months, so the 2 courses I did get 3 certificate for, and it was done in a year, and I've got those qualifications to do other stuff.
And the best thing you can do is to show them. Okay, that's, at the end of the day, show them the proud and confident person that you've become. Take on every opportunity, and for goodness sake, don't let that stamp, let that comment of that teacher be the rage that builds inside you to change the system. And then when you get into a position of influence, which you will, okay, then give other people a leg up who have suffered the same sort of injustice.
Okay. So, because we're now to a very get to a very important part of today, which is the presentation of the Kerferd Medal to Peter, and we're very, very lucky to have a very special fellow by the name of Elliot Kirkwood, who is the great-great-grandson of George Kerferd, and also just a great guy we discovered last night. So I'd just like to welcome Elliot up to the stage, please, and. I'll leave that there. Okay, I'll jump out of the way.
Thank you for the introduction, Pete. As a great-great-grandson of George Briscoe Kerferd, it is an honour to be representing all of his descendants today. First of all, thank you to Pete for your work emceeing and facilitating such a great discussion today. Thank you to the George Kerferd Hotel for putting on such a wonderful event, and also to the committee and Jess for putting in such hard work behind the scenes to make a day like today happen. And also to the Beechworth community. How great it is to be back here, seeing you all again in person, and what a lovely town to be in. Peter, what an insightful presentation today. Personally, I took plenty away from it, and hearing all the questions from the crowd, I know they have too. Reflecting on George as a person, as a young leader and entrepreneur, and with his gusto for change, I'm sure he would have relished discussing with you the challenge of education for the future. Since the inaugural Kerferd Oration 20 years ago, digital technology has become more available and increasingly integrated into our lives. We are now in the age of computers, internet, social media, and artificial intelligence. This change is only set to accelerate over the next 2 decades, transforming not only our workplace, but also the world as we know it. As we move into an era of accelerated change, there will be greater pressure on our educators to not only prepare our students with skills for jobs that don't exist yet, using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet. And I can see parallels with these challenges that we face with some of the challenges that George faced in his time. George was at the precipice of an exciting age. He was always looking at things from new angles, and he was driven by a constant curiosity to implement change. And while he might have been able to relate with the Prussian education system that we still have in place, I'm sure the speed of change that we're experiencing at the moment would have been something that astounded him. Just like our educators of today, George's purpose in life was to ensure the betterment of generations to come. His work his contributing work in the development of the Federation shows what a future thinker he was. And Peter, I'm sure he would have embraced your student-led learning concepts. It is great that we have events such as the Kerferd Oration that can bring us all together for a day of thought, connection, and community discussion, so that we might prepare for the future ahead, but also so that we can take control. So Peter, from me and from all the descendants of George Briscoe Kerferd, I thank you for your speech, and on behalf of the Kerferd Oration, I'm honoured to present you with the 20th George Briscoe Kerferd Medallion. Really insightful.
Keep your box too. Oh, thank you. No,
Just hold that pose for one more minute. Family got it? Yeah, okay, fantastic.
Just one more. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks. You grab a seat there.
the owner of
Nice one, nice one. Thanks so much, Elliot. Okay, so the Honour Board now shows eminent speakers from, not only 2003, but now, Peter Hutton. Can we please have one final round of applause, Peter? Thank you so much for everyone's involvement today. I really do encourage you all to continue the conversation over lunch. It's been a great honour to be able to participate with you all today. And I'd just, on behalf of the organising committee, like to encourage you all to complete the survey that's maybe sitting on your seat with you, or if you don't have access to one, you can actually get one from the table at the back. But also in the running order, there's a QR code. You can, if you are a bit more tech savvy, you can just click on the QR code and complete that survey online as well. It would mean a lot to the organising committee to have your feedback. And just in closing, the organising committee would like to thank all of the people involved in the creation of this year's oration, in particular Peter, and for your support, Elliot. And also would just like to extend a big thank you to the team at George Kerferd Hotel, who are generously supporting the oration this year, and who are providing us with some wonderful lunch in a minute. So I'd like to welcome you all to join us for lunch. Let's continue the conversation, and once again, thank you very much.